Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's The World This Week in partnership with The Daily Beast. Foreign editor Christopher Dickey is with us. Welcome back as well to Angela Diffley of sister station Radio France International. We're also with Ana Navarro Pedro of the Portuguese news magazine Visão, and Judah Grunstein of World Politics Review. The daring bet of pluralism. That was the front page headline in Le Monde, a highfalutin way, I suppose, of headlining that France's government now boasts its broadest political spectrum since the first government of Charles de Gaulle in 1959. It's possibly fair to say that Emmanuel Macron has completely upended the political landscape. He's picked off heavyweights from the big center-left bloc, from the big center-right bloc. This in a nation where, for too long, reform has been something of a taboo in many circles.
For decades, France has doubted itself. It has felt threatened in its culture, its social model, its profound beliefs. France has had doubts about where it comes from. This is why my mandate will be guided by two imperatives. The first will be to give back to the French their self-confidence. For too long it has been weakened. The Europe that we need will be restarted and relaunched because it protects us and allows us to spread our values throughout the world.
Angela Diffley, are we witnessing a revolution in France?
I wouldn't go that far. It has put both the mainstream parties, obviously, in a very difficult position, and particularly the right, which is, now that he's chosen a right-wing prime minister, is having great difficulty pointing out where the differences are between their own mainstream right-wing party and his cabinet, which now includes a right-wing prime minister and two other key figures in the economy ministry. Their strategy is to, in the upcoming parliamentary elections, to try and stem any of their people going into Macron's cabinet, which has so far worked reasonably well, and to try and stop any of their people standing under his label, and instead to get everyone to vote for them so that they will have a majority and so that they hope Macron's cabinet will tip to the right. The problem is they're having difficulty explaining to people what is really different between their programme and what an economy ministry under Macron might deliver. And so they're concentrating very much on issues such as terrorism, security, social conservatism, which might not be enough. Your
magazine, Visão, headlining the fact that you have this handover ceremony that took place earlier this week with the new prime minister, who hails not from Macron's camp, but from the centre-right, and who said, "I'm a man of the right." People are looking to sort of label, and it's true that when you look at the lineup of the cabinet, the purse strings are very much to the right.
It is, and I never saw Macron as a man of the left. I always saw him instinctively as a right-wing man with beliefs of right-wing, reducing the labor code in this country, what he calls modernizing labor laws and so forth. That is traditionally a right-wing field of action. But we don't know. He's an enigma, that man. He's a mysterious man. We don't know what he really believes in and what he really stands for. And, of course, I don't know how far this government can go, and I don't know how deep are their convictions. We seem to have this class of politicians in France nowadays that say everything is falling apart. And the only thing I know, I don't want to stand on the sides for 5 more years until the next election. So I'm just going to go in with this government. It's a government of technocrats, mostly people who did the École nationale d'administration, which is the big school training for civil servants and politicians alike.
All right, they're insiders, but coming together are people who are socialists and people who are from the right.
But that's what I say. I don't know how deep their convictions run.
The thing is, in your opening, you said that Macron upended the French political landscape. I'd argue that actually the French political landscape was upended, and that's why Macron won. That had the political landscape remained stable and continuous as it was, he didn't have a chance. But the fact is, the Socialist Party basically imploded. and François Fillon, who was the Republicans' candidate, self-destructed. So in other words, he benefited from really fantastic good fortune, and now what he did with his government is the truth is that the Republicans, in terms of their party structure, were actually the most solid of all of the parties that remained. So he knew that he had to divide them if he had any hope of winning a parliamentary majority. So in some ways, I think that the government he announced is a government that was purely based on electoral calculus to try to split the Republicans.
And try to get the right
It's not certain that there won't be a shakeup after the elections because some of them might not win.
I think there's going to be big cabinet changes after the elections, which are basically just a month away. But the real test of this government is not even going to be in the National Assembly. The test is going to be on the street. Because once he starts to try to implement those economic policies, those labor policies that you're talking about, what we've seen with every government, left, right, center, whatever it was, is hundreds of thousands of people turning out in the street saying, hell no, we won't accept this.
And this is where we don't know what kind of person he is, and will he be tough enough to push through the reforms which
and remember
many
something,
people in France
the very
agree now
day
needed.
he won, the very day the people elected him president of France, there were 2 polls asking what people would vote for and wished for in the upcoming parliamentary elections. And in one of the polls, it was 49% of the people they asked were asked this question, and the other poll was 61%. So it's a big swing, a big difference. But these 2 figures, 49%, 61% of the people were asked the question, said, we don't want him, Macron, to have a majority in parliament. This is quite amazing. This is a sense of distrust in what is coming up with him.
Distrust for the man, or distrust for a constitutional order where the president has a lot of power and they want more checks and balances?
For the man. For the man.
I don't think people feel that they know the man. I mean, people have traditional party loyalties, or they had traditional party loyalties, and then they would say, well, if the socialist won, then we want a socialist parliament. If the Gaullists, whatever they were calling themselves at the moment, won, then we want a Gaullist parliament. Now it's much harder to say. I think he's got a much harder thing to try to create.
There's also something very fundamental, which is that the reforms that he wants to push through, everyone knows what they are. They've been the same reforms that have been talked about for 20 years now. They're the reforms that maybe to a less extreme degree Alain Juppé was run out of office for in 1996 trying to get through. France is basically a country that has this reputation for being ungovernable and unreformable.
Or has he just exposed that, well, it's a European social democracy, and the guys on the center left and the guys on the center right pretend that they're very different, but they're not really.
The trouble with this is that if you have a government which is a mishmash of centre-left and centre-right, in many ways that's a hopeful sign. But it also means that anyone who is dissatisfied with this government has nowhere else to go except for the extreme right or the extreme left, which is a worrying situation.
Yeah, but Angela, what was happening and what we saw over the years, for instance, with the Socialist Party, is that you would always have the extreme pulling the party away from reasonable policies, what I would call reasonable policies. So you always had this Trotskyite element that was sucking it far to the left, and this effort, even people like Dominique Strauss-Kahn, back when he was supposedly a credible candidate, he was trying to embrace the Trotskyites because that's what you had to do as a socialist. Macron doesn't have to do that. He says, if you want a reasonable government with reasonable policies, let the Trotskyites go do their
I'm sorry, go ahead.
You go ahead.
The challenge that he has is that France, in terms of a political culture, is very partisan. You're left or you're right. I've heard stories of people in 2002 when they had to vote for Chirac, dyed-in-the-wool socialists literally in tears coming out of the voting booth. And the truth is that people don't trust the center in France. It's like a man who doesn't drink. It's just not to be trusted. And so
that's what I've always said.
What Macron has to do is create the animal that right now is a fiction. His government is sort of a mishmash, and he has to create a true center that has never really existed in France. And that's a huge challenge.
He has been very, very lucky, though, and I think actually...
He has been. But at one point, luck runs away.
And also the centre, in a sense, isn't quite the centre anymore because the whole of France has swung to the right. And I think he's been lucky in that I think finally people in France are starting to look around the world and accept that certain reforms might need to be done here. The problem is that his mandate has been slightly undermined by the fact that he was voted in also as a rejection of Marine Le Pen, not a vote always for him. And that undermines his whole
This is important. It goes back to the calculus that you made earlier about that exit poll on election day. There's a quiet revolution that's going on in this country, not just having a 39-year-old president. At least 1/3 of parliamentarians will not be seeking re-election. The reason being this new law that prevents you, up till now in this country, you could be
almost
mayor
like a gift
and MP and president of the regional council, and you could have all these different hats. And now you can only have one mandate at a time. Are we witnessing a quiet revolution? I get back to my original question.
That was the former president, François Hollande, and it was like a gift on a silver plate to Macron, or to the one who would come after him, because it meant that that person could go for a majority in parliament now. But still remember, this country, parliamentary elections is the scrutiny, the election method is majority, two-round majority.
Two-round system, yeah.
Two-round system. And that system is really not made for the emergency of new parties in such a short time. And Republicans are really knockout, but I mean, they shouldn't, because they have all the chances of winning this election. I must say, for the sake of just going forward in this country, it would be ideal if Macron had his majority. Then we'll see him govern, and then we'll know if he's capable or not, if his ideas are good or not. Just going back to a cohabitation will be terrible for France, I believe. But I'm not putting my money on Macron and his future.
All right, first,
it will depend on this moment.
There's an important aspect here. This Friday, Emmanuel Macron making his first trip to Africa. It's only his second trip abroad. The first was the day after his inauguration to Germany. As president, he went to northern Mali to visit the troops that are fighting the jihadists that were pushed back by French-led forces in 2013. And even at the gates of the Sahara Desert, he was talking about Europe, close to his heart, when he talked about the nearly 1,000 German forces that are now deployed in Mali, Germany's biggest deployment abroad.
France's mobilization is also EU-wide and international. And let me pay tribute to our allies in Europe, in particular Germany. Our brothers in arms are also here in Gaulle to advance peace in Mali.
This is incredible. He's talking about Europe and Germany while he's in Africa.
Sure. Well, there's three things here. First, I was really surprised, and it made a big impression on me, that coming back from one of the inaugural day ceremonies, he rode in a military jeep. Coming back, and now his first trip after meeting with
he's also hinting
Merkel,
that he's going to up the defense budget.
Sure,
he also
changed the name of the defense minister. It's the Minister of the Armies, which suggests that defense policy he's going to keep a closer hand on. I think part of this has to do with image. He was destroyed in the debate by Marine Le Pen, who had a terrible performance except for the part on security. Exactly. And I think he needed, image-wise, to boost that. I think his youth also plays a big part of this, because he's 39, very young. He's the first French president who never served in the military. And so he needs that as an image. And with regard to Germany and emphasizing Europe, there's two things. He's trying to reinforce Europe as a political space for his own domestic policy, but also for security policy, because France carries the heavy load in sub-Saharan Africa.
We also see that we have a German-speaking defense minister, Sylvie Goulard. She's a European member of Parliament. Army's minister.
Minister of the Army.
Minister of the Army. Correction. German-speaking finance minister in the person of Bruno Le Maire. There really is this fiber that's really trying to recreate the kickstart that.
Well, this is the biggest gamble of all, is whether you can make Europe function the way everybody wants it to function, which is protecting its citizens, protecting them economically to a certain extent, certainly protecting their physical security in a way that it absolutely failed to do in years past.
Were you surprised when you heard the list read out for the government, and it was called the Ministry of Europe and Foreign Affairs, and not the other way around?
No, I mean, I think that sends the message again and again and reinforces it again and again. But previously, the ministry that dealt with Europe, or it was a sub-ministry, I mean, it just didn't, it felt like an afterthought. Now he's putting it front and foremost.
And he finally has some sort of leverage with Angela Merkel. He has clearly done some sort of deal with her. He said, I will get through structural reforms. We'll see how that goes, changing the labour reforms and how much opposition there is on the street. But he will implement his side of the bargain. He wants her to agree to more governance of the Eurozone. But he finally has a threat. He can say, if we don't get some help from the Germans, the Front National will be in 5 years.
In Portugal, what are they saying about this?
Big relief that there is someone so pro-European, because even if Europe is not, accepted as a whole with no qualms whatsoever, there are a lot of them, but it's a big relief. But I think he's steering in order to have a European security defense, which should be absolutely necessary. And Trump may say whatever he wants about NATO being obsolete. The fact is the Pentagon will never let go of Europe, and they will want to have a very tight control of European defense, I believe. Okay. And so I think he's steering for that. He will need Germany, and of course France will be on the upper hand on this one because of Germany's constitution and the fact that Great Britain is pulling out of Europe. But I think he's doing too much regarding the military right now, and it's showing that it has a weak spot there. Those things going up in the military car and going to see wounded soldiers in the hospital and going to see the French soldiers in Mali, and he has a little problem with that. Okay,
before we go,
just going forward,
Before we go, let's...
I think you don't like him, Anna.
I don't see why you say that. I just said he should go for it. It's an enigma, and it's a dangerous enigma.
And it's interesting because he's loved abroad. And everyone here is much
more... He's loved by...
Well, that's like Obama was much more popular in France than he was in the United States.
A healthy dose of cynicism is, of course, important if you're a reporter. Another mantra for journalists is speak truth to power. It sets an ambitious standard when you say that. This week's assassination of investigative reporter Javier Valdez in the drug and gang-riddled Mexican state of Sinaloa, prompting a vigil in the capital and really a lot of soul-searching in many a newsroom. How do we live up to the standards of this 50-year-old founder of weekly news magazine Rio Doce, a man who not only stood up to gangs but to corrupt local authorities? Christopher Dickey, it's incredible how brave he was.
Sure, when you look at the rate of attrition, there were 11 journalists killed in Mexico, at least 11 journalists killed in Mexico last year. There have been, I think he was the fifth this year. He knew he was targeted. He said, to be a journalist is to know you're on a blacklist, on a death list. I think he was just incredibly brave. Our correspondent in Mexico started a hashtag which said basically, let's not have any journalism for a day. And a lot of the journalists, a lot of the websites and so on went dark for a day because people are fed up with this slaughter of journalists. But how do you stop it? There's virtual impunity.
To me, as someone who works out of the comfort of my office and I'm not in the field, I work in a country where there are press freedoms and there isn't intimidation of the press. I always have such an enormous admiration for people who, in environments where they know they're facing targeting, whether it's from criminal gangs or from the government, reporters in Russia, for instance, reporting on Chechnya, or throughout the world, really, in Turkey today. I often...
But we have a president of the United States who says the press is the enemy of the people, for God's sake.
Yeah.
I mean, let's bring it back to Trump for a second. If you have that kind of situation in those kinds of countries around the world, and you have the leader of the free world talking about the press as if it's the enemy of the people, then standards are going to get really low.
Well, it shows,
but the standards
it
are very low.
What we have in the States and what we have in Western Europe and what's worth fighting for.
We cannot compare the level of danger of doing journalism the way Javier did in Mexico and to what we do, but I believe your observation is very pertinent, because very apt, because we are actually having a backlash on journalists that is incredibly worrisome. Here in France, where we work in a free country, you had a former candidate, François Fillon, to presidency, who said, it's not the media who chooses the questions they ask me. And we have a new elected president who has said, it's not the new presidency, has said, it's not the media who choose the journalists who follow me or follow the president. So this is, you know, setting up. It's very upsetting. And I think your comparison was very apt.
Whilst that's true, I think obviously all these cases are so very, very different, and there's no comparison whatsoever between political reporting and being out in war zones or drug situations. That said, I do think the number of people I spoke to in the run-up to the elections who said, I hate journalists. I hate journalists. You impose your views. You don't listen to what ordinary people have to say. You all have the same views. And I felt quite uncomfortable. We are part of often a world that is comfortable with globalization. That is not the case for everybody, and I think we have often failed to reflect that.
All right, we're going to leave it there for now, but I want to thank you, Angela Diffley, Judah Grunstein, Ana Navarro-Pedro, and Christopher Dickey. Stay with us. Media Watch is next. And we say hello to Diptyque Laurent.
Hi, François.
Christopher Dickey chastised himself for bringing everything back to Trump. What are you going to talk about? Tell us.
I am talking about Trump.
Oh, there you go.
So you can chastise me now. We're talking about Trump in particular. He's packing his bags because he's going overseas. His first big foreign trip as president, or since becoming president. And he even tweeted about it, saying he's getting ready and he'll be strongly protecting American interests. That's what I like to do, you know, the kind of
I love this first line. Getting ready for my big foreign trip.
Sounds like an Erasmus student.
He's apparently he hates traveling. He hates not sleeping in his own home, and he's asked if he can cut the trip short already.
That's right. He does. He's notorious for hating traveling, and I'll get to that in a second. The Saudis are, of course, making sure that everything is as it should be for Donald Trump.
Angela's right. This is why they hate journalists. Look at this photo.
The headline is quite apt. Saudi Arabia has said they'll have a stock of steak and ketchup for Donald Trump because he doesn't like traveling, and so they want to make sure that he's feeling at home, because of course his Saudi trip, or at least the first portion of his foreign trip, will be sort of all about wining and dining. The Saudis really want to get on Trump's good side and see a thawing in the relations between them. There'll be also Fox News host Brett Baier and U.S. country singer Toby Keith will be performing a concert for a male-only crowd in Riyadh. So, you know, there'll be sort of Trump's allies on hand. And ABC says it may on appearance be about friendship, but authorities are looking to lock down their strategic interests with the West. And as I said, they'll be serving ketchup.
Your reaction to Toby Keith, because...
he
sings
a
song about booze.
He sings, but he sings one of my favorite songs, which is courtesy of the Red, White, and Blue. The punchline is, "It will put a boot in their ass. It's the American way."
Sounds like something Trump would tweet, doesn't it?
Right.
The Independent says Saudis, also, much like the rest of the world, have been briefed that Donald Trump prefers short presentations and visual aids, so no long, drawn-out diplomatic speeches.
I'll be honest, this is the human aspect that I kind of find endearing. I mean, it's scary that it's the U.S. president, but if we were just talking about someone else, it would be like, oh, it's kind of endearing. He doesn't like travel. You got to keep it short for him.
Well, yeah, but that article, that's a devastating article.
It's a little worrisome that it's the U.S. president.
I mean, you read it, every paragraph gets worse.
And when you compare it to Clinton and I don't know how many countries she visited when she was Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton, so different.
Anyway,
we're cutting off.
No, but yeah, it's of course, while he's in Saudi Arabia, maybe we'll talk less about what's going on in Washington?
Well, that's what some of the media is saying. If he's hoping that it's going to be a diversion from his domestic problems, you might recognize this article.
Brilliant piece.
In fact, he's not the only president to have embarked on his first foreign trip under so much controversy. Nixon also left for Saudi Arabia back in '74. But Chris Dickey does say that when he left, at least he was considered competent in the eyes of world leaders. That's not really the case for Donald Trump, and even more so for the fact that he's giving a lecture on lecture to Muslims on his hopes for a peaceful vision of Islam. This coming from the president who banned Muslims from his country. So the irony we could talk about endlessly. Anyway, NPR says, anyway, for any president, there's no escaping domestic politics when you're overseas. And while he may be warmly welcomed by Saudi authorities, it won't be the same for the European leaders, and particularly at that NATO summit, because Trump doesn't really know how or what NATO does. So this cartoon really speaks to that. This is how NATO leaders are preparing to talk to Donald Trump.
Oh, dear.
Trump's brain.
We're gonna leave it there. No wonder he wants to cut the trit short. This is the last leg. I want to thank our panel once again. Thank you, Dipti Kanal. Thank you for being with us here in The World This Week.